In the fall of 2004, a researcher studying satellite images of the Chernobyl zone noticed a strange object. In the forest about 3 miles northwest of Pripyat, an elongated shape could be seen among the trees, resembling the fuselage of a large transport aircraft. Previously, nothing had been recorded at this location. The object appeared sometime between 2000 and 2004, when the images were taken several years apart. It immediately attracted attention due to its size, symmetry, and the absence of a crater, as would be expected after a crash. An expedition group working in the zone with scientific clearance reached the coordinates and discovered a moss-covered metal structure. Despite the damage, the fuselage retained its shape. It was lying flat with no signs of an explosion or impact. This ruled out a crash from altitude. No reports from the Soviet or Ukrainian era mentioned an aircraft crash in this area. It became clear either no one knew about this aircraft or it was deliberately kept secret. An independent and thorough investigation began, which very soon uncovered even stranger and more perplexing details. The location of the find confirmed the assumption. It really was an aircraft fuselage. The metal skin, riveted joints, and rounded shape all pointed to an aviation origin. The visible section was over 60 feet long. But the strangest thing was the complete lack of markings. No tail number, no ownership insignia, no technical labels. Even after decades, paint is usually at least partially preserved. Here there was nothing. The surface had either been deliberately stripped or was never marked to begin with. Such a thing is rare, even for military equipment. At the same time, the structure of the skin resembled army transport models. Some sections were damaged. The metal was darkened, in places melted, but there were no signs of fire. It didn't look like an explosion or a crash. Inside the fuselage, they found traces of cable routing, remnants of internal insulation, and broken partitions. The metal turned out to be light, strong, with signs of being a titanium alloy. Similar materials were used in aviation, but more often in highly specialized projects. The biggest question was the complete absence of any information about the incident in archival documents. There was nothing in the reports of the civil aviation of the USSR, the Ministry of Emergency Situations, or the Ministry of Defense. The researchers were faced with an airplane that, according to all databases, had never existed. After analyzing the structures, it became clear the airplane did not resemble any serial model produced in the USSR or abroad. The geometry of the fuselage, the arrangement of the bulkheads, and the technological solutions did not correspond to the standards of either civil or military aviation of the 1980s. One of the aviation experts brought in to study the photos immediately noted the shape of the fuselage was too elongated for a passenger aircraft. There were no wings, but the mounting points on the body were clearly present. However, even from those, it was difficult to determine the configuration. It did not match any known models, neither TU nor IL nor Boeing. Special attention was drawn to the insulation. Instead of the usual materials, there was a composite film resembling modern heat-reflective coatings. Such technologies were extremely limited in use in the 1980s and only in classified military projects. Attempts to determine the origin of the aircraft by fragments of the interior equipment yielded no results. The wreckage lacked serial parts typical of manufacturing, no factory codes, no stamps, no standard markings. Experts began to make cautious assumptions. Perhaps it was a flying prototype used for testing, or a modified aircraft without official registration. But then the truly main and significant question arises: who precisely sent this mysterious object into the highly restricted Chernobyl exclusion zone, and for what specific and ultimate purpose? The 1980s were the peak of Cold War tensions. The airspace over Ukraine was under the control of the USSR's air defense. Any intrusion was tracked and documented. But there is not a single mention in the archives of unauthorized flights in the Chernobyl area from the early 80s to the late 90s. However, when comparing flight corridor maps, one coincidence was discovered. In mid-April 1986, a section of the observation zone in the Kiev Air Defense District was closed for a day, supposedly for scheduled maintenance. Coincidence? According to the documents, the radar was shut down for about 5 hours. That would have been more than enough time for an unregistered aircraft to fly over or even land, especially if it was equipped with radar stealth technology. Researchers also studied airfield layouts and possible routes within the exclusion zone. No known routes passed through this point. This could mean only one thing. If a plane really did appear here in the 80s, its course was not coordinated with any civilian or military authority. This leads to the assumption that someone took advantage of the air defense shutdown to infiltrate one of the most heavily guarded areas in the country, and did so with such complete silence that for decades no one even suspected the flight had taken place. The next step was to check the radio frequencies and communications recorded by air traffic control services on key dates. The most interesting were the recordings from April 1986. Analysis of archival audio files showed that in the days before and after the Chernobyl disaster, there was indeed an unusual radio silence in the skies. In some areas, there was no radio communication at all. There were technical failures, fragments of conversations, but not a single mention of an unidentified aircraft. No request for landing, no information about entering the airspace. That's strange. Even in an emergency situation, air traffic control posts continue to operate. But here there is absolute silence. In addition, researchers drew attention to a fact that had long been considered insignificant. Part of the communications at the Kyiv Aviation Hub during the night of April 25th to 26th was not preserved. According to the official version, this was due to a recording system failure. But in the same archive, there is no explanation as to why the files were not restored later. Such a large-scale failure of radio control, coinciding with critical events, is alarming. Either something happened at the level of a systemic error, or someone deliberately ensured complete radio silence. It was precisely during this period that the plane could have appeared in the area without leaving a single digital trace. An inspection of the area showed the plane did not fall from a great height. Under the fuselage, there was neither a crater nor any signs of an explosion. The structure was lying evenly as if after an emergency landing. The trees around were partially damaged but not scorched. This indicated a descent at minimal speed, as if the pilot was trying to land the aircraft, not just save himself after a system's failure. On the ground, there were only traces of destruction from the fall of large elements, the tail boom and a broken-off compartment. But the main sections of the fuselage remained in place. The landscape shows no signs of fuel or fire impact. Fragments of the wings or engines were also not found. It is possible they were removed later or they were completely destroyed. Experts compared the nature of the damage with similar emergency landings. Most of the signs are consistent with a controlled landing. This is possible in the event of a communication failure and loss of navigation, but with piloting still maintained. The condition of the ground added further intrigue. Under the lower part of the fuselage, the soil was partially compressed, as if by the weight of a heavy object, but not deeply. This confirmed that the impact with the ground was soft. This means that the pilot or the onboard operator was acting consciously and controlled the craft until the very end. A new question arises. If this was a landing, what happened to the pilot? No traces of evacuation, parachutes, or crew were found. No personal belongings, no packaging, no documents. It was as if the object had been deliberately left behind. No signs of life, but technically intact. It looked more like an operation than a disaster. While the investigation was ongoing, attention was drawn to an interview with a former Chernobyl technician, Anatoly Giech. He was on shift the night before the accident and years later spoke about a strange sound he heard late in the evening, about 3 hours before the first surge at the station. According to him, the sound resembled the low hum of a jet engine but lasted only a few seconds. The source came from the northwest direction, the very place where debris was later found. That night was quiet and the sound was clearly audible. At the time, no one paid attention. The systems were operating and there were no alarms. Later, other employees recalled this episode. Some also heard the strange noise but attributed it to machinery operating in distant areas. There are no recordings from the outdoor surveillance cameras for that period in the archives. It is noted that part of the system was turned off at that time due to maintenance. The interview did not attract much attention until the coordinates of the sound began to match the location where, decades later, the aircraft fuselage was found. The witness turned out to be the only one who gave a plausible account of what happened that night. The information about the strange rumble in the sky adds to the chain of coincidences, which increasingly points to the fact that an unknown aircraft could have been over Chernobyl on the very night of the disaster. And if that's the case, it means it could have been part of the events whose consequences the world still feels today. Non-standard metal, fragments of the fuselage were sent to an independent laboratory. Experts conducted a spectral analysis of the alloy and came to an unexpected conclusion. The metal did not correspond to any aviation standard approved in the USSR. The base was aluminum with additions of titanium and rare earth elements, which increase heat resistance. Such a composition was hardly ever used in the Soviet Union in the 80s, especially in mass-produced equipment. The use of such alloys was limited to experimental prototypes and specific projects for the military and aerospace industries. Even at the design bureau level, such materials were rare due to their high cost and processing complexity. The laboratory noted that the alloy is similar to those used in the United States for limited production aircraft, especially in projects related to high-altitude reconnaissance and unmanned technology. But no known American aircraft had the same dimensions and configuration as the discovered fuselage. Unconventional joints were also identified, as well as rivets made from composite alloys and reinforced internal seams. This indicated that the structure was designed with extreme conditions in mind: high temperatures, overloads, and possibly radiation exposure. One of the experts stated outright, "This aircraft was not intended for mass production. It is either a one-off prototype or a craft from a classified series about which there is no public information." Such an approach in manufacturing is used when it comes to top-secret missions. No official requests regarding lost equipment were ever filed, which means that whoever created this aircraft, its disappearance was not supposed to raise any questions. After obtaining the initial data, the research team sent official requests to Ukrainian and Russian state archives. They were interested in the period from the early 80s to the late 90s. Special attention was paid to records of aircraft losses, emergency landings, and equipment transfers. The response from the State Archive of Ukraine was concise. There is no data on aviation incidents in the Pripyat area for the specified period. The Russian archives replied formally, citing limited access to materials from the USSR Ministry of Defense. Even with a scientific inquiry, access to information about emergency situations remained closed. At the same time, researchers checked civil aviation databases, both Soviet and international. Not a single incident matching the coordinates and time was recorded. No records of search and rescue operations or disposal of aircraft in this area were found either. This brought the investigation to a dead end. The plane physically existed, its wreckage lay in the forest, but there was no documentation of it. In a bureaucratic system where everything is accounted for, this seemed impossible. The only working theory left was that the plane was never listed in the official registries to begin with, and if it was built outside the system, then its disappearance could also go unnoticed. The history of the Cold War knows dozens of cases when foreign planes violated the borders of the USSR. In most such incidents, the intruders were intercepted and forced to land or destroyed. Some flights remained classified, especially those involving reconnaissance equipment. The archives contain records of unauthorized flights near the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the late 70s and early 80s. Most often, these were high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft detected by radar at the border and then disappearing from the screens. Their models were not officially published. Some experts noted an interest in the nuclear power plant as a potential target and object of reconnaissance. Photos of the plant were found in declassified photo archives of American reconnaissance satellites. This indicated that the facility attracted interest not only from the USSR. Is it possible that one of these aircraft was in the air over Pripyat on the night of the disaster? If so, why wasn't it detected by air defense? Why did no one report its crash? The fact remains, the wreckage was found, but its absence in air defense and civil aviation reports is a serious signal. This means that either the flight was absolutely secret or its presence was meant to go unnoticed. After the publication of the wreckage photos, discussions began in professional circles. Aerospace specialists who studied the footage began to share their opinions. Many immediately ruled out civilian aircraft. No production airliner had such a fuselage shape or internal structure. Interesting details were noted: mounts for non-standard components, an unusual internal frame design, and insulation materials typical for vehicles operating at high temperatures. All this resembled not a transport aircraft, but rather a test platform. Several engineers compared it to prototypes from Soviet and Western developments. One of them was the Taganrog-1, an experimental aircraft built in the early 80s, but which never took to the air. However, the resemblance was only partial. It is more likely that the researchers were looking at one of the unique prototypes created under strict secrecy. One of the aviation experts stated directly, "Such machines are not registered in open databases. They are created for one-off missions and disappear after completing their task. It is possible that this aircraft was never meant to return." This opinion was presented as a hypothesis, but given the lack of data in the archives and the overall secrecy, it seemed quite logical. One of the details that long went unnoticed was the fastening elements inside the fuselage: corner ribs, guides, and locks. Everything indicated that a large-size cargo was transported in the central part of the body. Based on the shape and size of the fastenings, it could be assumed that these were containers about 8 feet long. Such modules are used to transport equipment or apparatus. Some of the locks were partially deformed, as if from a strong impact or rapid unloading. The internal traces also looked unusual. There were scuff marks on the floor, as if the cargo had been moved manually through the cabin or rolled on wheels. This was uncharacteristic for military aviation, where everything is usually securely fastened. The aircraft looked like a transport platform, not for people but for equipment. It is possible that it was used to deliver equipment related to research. This could have been a communications module, a power unit, or even something requiring special conditions. But this is where the main problem arose. The cargo had disappeared. No traces of the contents were found, no fragments, no packaging. If there really was something on board, it was either evacuated immediately after landing or all traces were carefully erased. The researchers leaned toward the second option. This further reinforced the impression that the operation had been planned in advance and that the landing was not an emergency but a scheduled one. Someone brought something and then disappeared. Despite the abundance of evidence, the investigation reached a dead end. The object was real, the material was genuine, but all information about this craft seemed to have vanished. Not a single document, not a single record, no testimony from military or aviation authorities. After the reports were published, the area where the wreckage was located was quickly cordoned off. The research group was no longer allowed access. A few months later, the object disappeared from drone footage. It was either removed or camouflaged. Attempts to request data from international organizations that monitor aviation incidents also led nowhere. Officially, not a single aircraft was reported missing in that area. The researchers were left with a conclusion that is hard to accept. The plane existed, but officially it did not. Not in any registry, not in any report. The only evidence, photos, materials, metal analyses, and witnesses whose voices gradually began to fall silent. It was this chapter that put a logical end to the investigation. But as often happens, when the answers run out, only questions remain.